Revolution to spread to Israel, Japan, and Middle East this autumn. The election of Donald Trump as President of the United States was a major step towards defeating the Khazarian mafia worldwide. However, the Trump presidency still represents an attempt to reform the old system rather than a true revolution. Trump has been keeping the United States of America corporation afloat, mainly with money extorted from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other Middle Eastern oil sectors, along with funds looted from Japan and South Korea. The Chinese are also playing their part in keeping the old regime going because their huge structural trade surplus with the US gives them plenty of dollars to use to buy friends and influence people around the world. The Rothschild and other bloodline families who have been running the planet successfully co-opted the Chinese with bribes and flattery. The over $1 trillion Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative is the reward for helping keep the old system afloat. The Paris Accords, supported by 19 out of 20 G20 countries, for its part, was an attempt to keep the bloodline-controlled IMF, World Bank, UN, and other international institutions going by giving the Chinese greater voting rights at the expense of the US, even as they kept these institutions firmly under their control. The problem is that this reform is based on fraudulent claim that carbon is causing global warming. It is not actually true. It also leaves the old families firmly in charge. Remember, the people of the planet Earth did not select the heart of the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS, and etc. It was all done behind the scenes by the ruling family. For sure, the factions behind the Paris Accord represent the moderate, non-genocidal group within the bloodline ruling structure, including the royal families of Europe. They were able to secure this accord with the help of Asian royal bloodlines. Overall, they mean well, but they are simply not competent to deal with the ongoing, systematic collapse of their economic system. The current ruling class in the West is presiding over the largest mass extinctions event since the dinosaurs were wiped out by the meteorite 75 million years ago. People of Europe and East Asia, the most productive on Earth, are experiencing demographic collapse. Income disparity in the West is now higher than the levels that led to the collapse of the Roman Empire. To add insult to injury, the criminals behind the 11th September, the destruction of countries like Iraq, Libya, and Syria, Fukushima, the spreading of bioweapons like SARS, Ebola, AIDS, and etc., have yet to be arrested or punished. Furthermore, we are not seeing any jubilee or one-time write-off of debts, nor are the seeing of a redistribution of fraudulently obtained assets. This is especially clear in the case of the Lehman shock, where documentary evidence proved the bloodline families created $23 trillion through fraud and used that money to buy up access worldwide and had been turned into bargains by the financial collapse they had engineered. Why is that money not being confiscated? Since the Lehman crisis, the central banks have been carrying out the so-called quantitative monetary easing. However, the vast sums being created as a result of this policy are being funneled only to financial companies controlled by Khazarian mafia hunters. They are not done things like putting money directly into ordinary people's personal bank accounts. That is why the quantitative easing had the effect of increasing wealth disparity. Forensic analysis shows that most of the money flowed through about 700 individuals, so that means it is not the 1%, but rather the 0.00001% who has benefited from the money printing. The reason for this is because the bloodline families still control the privately owned central banks for their own personal benefit, not for the benefit of the planet and its living beings. Donald Trump, who was put in power by the bloodline-opposed Gnostic Illuminati, has not changed this because as president of the most in-depth country in the world history, he does not have the leverage needed. Actually, though, he does. Remember the saying, If you owe the bank $10,000, it is your problem. But if you owe the bank $1 million, it is the bank's problem. It is a fact that the U.S. corporate government defrauded on May the 3rd of this year when its wholly owned Puerto Rico subsidiary defrauded. And yet, the Washington, D.C. show is still going on. That is because, as mentioned above, the U.S. corporations creditors like the Chinese, the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Middle Eastern oil-producing companies are subsidizing its $700 billion a year losses. So, how can we change the situation? The first opportunity comes at the U.S. corporation's September 30th fiscal payment deadline. Each year around that time, as the payment deadline approaches, we see all sorts of maneuvers. It will not be different this year, and the U.S. corporate government seeks to roll over its payment past the deadline. This will mean threats of war, blackmail, extortions, begging, bluffing, and etc. In the news, it will appear as threats of war with Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and anybody else who is not coughing off protection money. If this effort succeeded, then events will continue along their kicking the can down the wood trajectory. This will mean a continuation of a slow fall of living standards in the West that began in the late 1960s. The alternative is the word revolution. This means physically occupying the BIS, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve Board, and the Bank of Japan and other bloodline-owned central banks. This will make it theoretically possible to issue quadrillions of dollars to be used in financing an unprecedented campaign to end poverty, stop environmental destruction, and expand out into the universe. Of course, the families that own the private central banks have spent years vilifying such ideas with code words like monetizing debt, saying it will lead to inflation and irresponsible government spending. That may have been true in the past when certain descendant kings or corrupted governments tried their hand at such things. However, stop and think for a minute. What does monetizing debt mean? It means turning debt into money. In other words, it means ending debt slavery. Remember, the debt owed to the central bankers is not legitimated. The bankers did not earn the money they lent to people, and governments, in the real world doing real things, they just put numbers in computers. So monetizing the debt simply means renouncing debt slavery. Of course, if you just printed out vast amounts of money, say by depositing $1 million into every single bank account in the country, the result would be an inflationary arcade followed by a huge headache. However, there are examples of government-owned central banks that have created huge benefits. Canada from 1938 to 1973 uses government-owned central bank to pay for World War II, built the canal system linking the Great Lakes to Atlantic Ocean, built the Trans-Canada Highway, the world's longest, pay education costs, pay health insurance costs, finance public works, pay for the military, and etc. This was all done without taxes or debt. The Japanese military government before and during World War II also paid for its gigantic war